Sri Aurobindo is leading us through a series of reconciliations, integrations from the perspective of the self. When the self turns to look upon the world and embraces its world, working, acting through various modes, various poles of its manifestation, the human perspective can easily catch one of these and see it as all. Seen from the self, they are all only aspects of itself. And so, in the text we are now reading, Sri Aurobindo presents the perspective from the self, reconciling, harmonizing all these different varied human exaggerations or human specializations in their philosophies and religions. We have seen earlier the reconciliation that is made between the monist, the dualist, and the qualified monism. We have seen also the three Purushas, the moving power of the self, the static poise of the self, and the highest station, which includes both these. And in our own consciousness, the relationships that we can set with these three. And connected with this, he now introduces two other ideas: the Indian conception of qualitied and qualityless Brahman, and the distinction that the European thought has made between personal and impersonal God. And he takes these in sequence. In the portion we read last time, we dwelt on the Brahman, qualitied and qualityless, Saguna and Nirguna. And we saw how these are both essentially specialized appearances of one who transcends both these poises. In the text we read, it is not merely a philosophical position that's taken, but in fact one has to see it from a more experiential or intuitive insight, where you can feel the reality of it. In this way, Sri Aurobindo is remolding our perspective of the world, but also our perspective of the divine as we approach him. There are some very skillfully stated relationships which we could stop with merely as philosophical arguments, or we can try to feel in them the deeper truth. And for this reason that we are dwelling upon them again and again and drawing analogies. He says the unqualified Nirguna is not incapable of qualities. Rather, it is this very Nirguna or no quality who manifests himself as Saguna, the qualitied, as Anantaguna, infinite quality, since he contains all in his absolute capacity of boundlessly varied self-revelation. So we are uniting these two different ideas of the divine in a single movement. One who is beyond quality, being able to manifest himself as infinite quality. But also when he takes the station to be free of all those qualities, he appears to us as if without quality. So, he is free from them in the sense of exceeding them. And indeed, if he were not free from them, they could not be infinite. God would be subject to his qualities. The analogy we can draw on in the human experience Whenever you have to deal with some material, you can only deal with it in mastery when you are yourself free from all the limitations of the material. Just as an example, being in a human body, we have to act through our two hands and the 5 fingers of each hand. If we have to write a text or type a text in the Latin alphabet, 26 characters, well, you have only 10 fingers. So you have to lay out those 26 characters so that your fingers can move around on the keyboard. The fact that you have these hands, you are these hands, limits your capacity to be able to act in matter by what you are. When you disengage yourself from the hands and are able to act bypassing the hands, then you find you can do so much more. In the Air Force, when a pilot flies a military aircraft during dogfights, he has to make such sharp turns at such high speeds that the blood drains from the head towards the feet and the pilot blacks out for a moment or a few seconds. If he turns the other way, the blood rushes to his head and he can burst capillary. Under such extreme circumstances, it's almost impossible to move your hands skillfully. You are limited by the capacity of your hand, the weight of your hand and the strength of your muscle. The only way you can make such sharp turns freely without being limited by your hands is to get free of your hands. And the most advanced technologies use the eyes. By following the look, the sight, without moving the head, just the eyes moving, the plane is guided. Or, even more advanced, which we are told is not yet in use officially, but unofficially we are told is in use, where the brain is wired directly to the machine and it is the thought which guides. And so you are free of your biological limitations and can exercise the full freedom of matter, on matter. It is this idea which you will find everywhere in any human activity and skill. When you play the piano, to the extent that you are limited with the fingers that you have, to the extent that your hand has a structure of so many muscles in certain directions, you can only do so much. But a skillful player is able to play in such a way that it seems as if to be impossible for human hands. It is as if he is able to reach a level of transcendence that, although using the hands, he is not bound by their limitations. That's when we say, this is a master. And the same in dances or in vocal music or any other instrument. Something is done where you exceed the limitation of the instrumentation itself, and then you say, this is true mastery. In the same sense, when the divine acts through infinite qualities of consciousness, and we've discussed what that means last time, when he acts through infinite qualities, if he is himself embedded in the qualities, they can never be infinite. They can never be completely free to play out as he wills. It is only when he can take a stance beyond all these qualities that he can wield them with full freedom. That stance appears from a certain perspective as if quality-less. But quality-less is also a quality, or rather absence of quality, or withdrawing all quality. The real freedom is in a transcendence of which qualitied and qualityless are specialized aspects. So Sri Aurobindo says, the eternal is bound neither by quality nor absence of quality, neither by personality nor by impersonality. He is Himself, beyond all our positive and all our negative definitions. And then in the next paragraph, if we cannot define the eternal, we can unify ourselves with it. And so there was a discussion which we saw last time, that we can free ourselves into the existence of the active Brahman as well as the silence. And we can take both poises. The part of us which is involved in activity frees itself into the active Brahman. The part of us which is supporting the activity frees itself into the silence. So we can live in both, go back in our being in both, but each in its proper way. By becoming one with the Nirguna, qualityless in our essence, and one with the Saguna, qualitied, in the liberty of our active being. And just as He pours Himself out of His silence, we too take that double poise in our own consciousness. The difference remains, we saw last time. The divine acts through all things, subject to nothing, simultaneously present in the center of all things, acting through all things. Whereas we act through this individual center, the sole form of Him which we are. That's the only difference. Otherwise, the state of consciousness and the identification with Him is complete. The Lord is subject to nothing. And now comes a very powerful idea. The individual soul form is subject to its own highest self. So here is subjection within us, freedom from subjection in the Lord, and then comes the extraordinary idea. And the greater and more absolute is that subjection, that is our subjection to the highest self. The greater becomes its sense of absolute force and freedom. So this seems so contrary, paradoxical, that the more we subject ourselves to the self, the more becomes the sense of absolute force and freedom. Freedom we have always defined in terms of not subjection to anything else. But here, the else is not different from us, it is ourselves. And the more we subject ourselves to ourselves, the more we come into the image of that which we are. That is absolute force, absolute freedom. And so it sounds paradoxical, but when you think about it, it makes eminent sense that by allowing yourself to be more and more subject to and more identified with your own highest self, you grow in freedom, you grow in absolute force, you grow in the image of that. And that is one with the origin, with the Lord. And so these are very important ideas. I have summarized and reread them because these have to be seeped into our being, and not only as an understanding of the relationship with the divine and the world, but as a constant living inspiration for us. That the more we are able to let go of ourself, meaning our limited false self, and the more we are able to consciously put ourselves in relation to ourself, true self, the more is the freedom and sense of the absolute force. Freedom from all other subjection as we grow into His freedom. So somewhere as this idea becomes more and more deeply imprinted, you will find the resistance of your ego to letting go begins to thin out. It's a very deep-rooted problem in human nature that prevents us from making otherwise what would be rapid progress. Because something in us tends always to want to retain our distinctiveness, our sense of separateness, the thing we have so long identified ourselves to be, although limited. We complain of those limitations, we complain of the incapacities, but somewhere we refuse to let go. And to allow this idea to imprint deeply that we have to let go what we are and allow ourselves to align and join with what we truly are. It means, of course, knowing what that is. And if we don't know what it is, at least not in direct experience, at least we can know in our understanding, and that's why this text and its study and the deep imprinting of these ideas is so valuable. But on the other hand, as we dwell on these ideas, we feel their truths. We know intuitively, and we feel the closeness. And if we let our heart open, then we feel that closeness also in our heart. And with that, we can give ourselves and let go and give ourselves and let go and give ourselves. And the whole pace of our freedom and growth increases rapidly. So the Lord is subject to nothing. The individual soul form is subject to its own highest self. And the greater and more absolute is that subjection, the greater becomes its sense of absolute force and freedom. And so rather than fighting ourselves against ourselves, our higher self, we allow that subjection. This neatly connects to the next paragraph, which discusses the distinction between the personal and impersonal aspect of the divine. When we put ourselves in alignment with our own highest self, what is that to us? How can we relate ourselves to it? Is it an impersonal state of consciousness? Is it a person that I can look to and give myself to? Or set aside your own personal highest self, but the divine himself. Is it something like a consciousness, immense, spaceless, timeless, or transcending space, transcending time, infinite in space, infinite in time, and we look to as a kind of a flat, monotone, impersonal reality? Or is it someone we can relate to intimately as we would to a person? Here, of course, personal and impersonal is put with capital P and capital I. Not just a human, but something fundamentally of a different order. But still there is a distinction to be made, he says, between the Indian perspective of these two terms and the European thought. And this distinction is extremely important because there are many such deep-rooted distinctions in various cultures, traditions, or even within religions. Although they may use the same words, they may mean by them something radically different that you can recognize, or sometimes with a subtle difference that you cannot recognize, and you may end up in cross-communication. So he says here, the distinction between the personal and the impersonal is substantially the same as the Indian distinction of saguna and nirguna, qualitied and qualityless. But the associations of the English words carry within them a certain limitation which is foreign to Indian thought. This distinction, let's read on then. The personal God of the European religions is a person, capital P, in the human sense of the word, limited by his qualities, though otherwise possessed of omnipotence and omniscience. It answers to the Indian special conceptions of Shiva or Vishnu or Brahma, or the Divine Mother of all, Durga or Kali. So he has placed here, made the fine distinction between the European God in the European religions Now, this distinction is extremely important because otherwise we use the same terms and we do not understand why on the other side the gods behave differently. This distinction he makes is most obviously seen in Greek mythology, and you can see how that could have formed or easily influenced the early religious traditions developing in that space. So the personal god of the European religions is a person, capital P, in the human sense of the word, limited by his qualities. So you have a person. What do we mean by a human person? This person has this particular pattern of qualities we call his personality. It is by the limitation that you define a person. We define ourselves subjectively also as I am not this table, I am not these clothes, I am not this. And so by an exclusion, by limiting myself, what remains is me. Because if I start describing me, there's an infinity that I can describe into the finest details. It's much easier to just separate myself and limit myself and say this is me. So something like that takes place, except that otherwise possessed of omnipotence and omniscience, the God has all power and knows everything. So you will see in Greek mythology, when Zeus gets upset, well, he can do pretty much what he wants with the powers he has, he can know whatever he wants to, and so on. And yet he has this personality. He behaves in this particular way. He gets upset if you do this or don't do that, and so on. And so with the other gods. But always they share in the omnipotence and omniscience, although their qualities are limited. So in that sense, they are persons with enormous powers. You will see the same concept recreated in modern times, almost, with many of the comic characters of Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, or other variations of these ideas, where a person with a personality and yet having huge powers, almost approaching omnipotence and omniscience, not quite, but still, matching the current modern value systems, less religiously seen, but still the same attempt to replicate. But when you come to his limited qualities, then he is as vulnerable as any other human being with the same kind of emotions or limitations. So Sri Aurobindo does not make an exact identification with the Indian terms of Shiva, Vishnu, etc. He says it answers to the Indian special conceptions of Shiva or Vishnu or Brahma. So it answers to, meaning there is a similarity that here also you see these deities with special kinds of behavior. But then there is a fundamental distinction. And that distinction he points out later, that in the Indian conception, although there is a pattern of qualities expressed, within is still the infinite potential and all quality latent. It is only a front that is put out, and it never is limited by the front. So that distinction being there, otherwise there is a similarity between these concepts. From a very human perspective, such forms of deity with particular qualities are helpful for us because we can relate to them more easily. We can feel them close to us because they are like us, but a little better. And so that makes it accessible. If they are so much greater, then it's too far away. So we bring them close enough, but slightly superior to whatever we are currently able to accept as a reference. Also, if they are able to be everything, then I don't have a focal point to connect to. And so often in a cultural context, people will put upon their gods those qualities which the culture is most struggling with in that age, at that time. He gives a few examples here. The fierce and inexorable God of Calvin is a different being from the sweet and loving God of Saint Francis. As the gracious Vishnu is different from the terrible, though always loving and beneficent Kali, who has pity even in her slaying and saves by her destructions. Shiva, the god of ascetic renunciation, who destroys all things, seems to be a different being from Vishnu and Brahma, who act by grace, love, preservation of the creature or for life and creation. We can read the rest of the text and then we'll come back to elaborate. It is obvious that such conceptions can be only in a very partial and relative sense true descriptions of the infinite and omnipresent creator and ruler of the universe. The personal God, nor does the Indian religious thought affirm them as adequate descriptions. So obviously we say that one God cannot be just these things. And so in the Indian tradition it's clearly stated, the personal God is not limited by his qualities. He is Ananta Guna, infinite quality, capable of infinite qualities, and beyond them and Lord of them, to use them as he will. And he manifests himself in various names and forms of his infinite Godhead to satisfy the desire and need of the individual soul according to its own nature and personality. And so you find in the Indian thought, although each of these deities has a certain personality, they have a certain character, Shiva is described as easy to appease, but also quick to anger. So he gets upset very quickly. Shigra Kopi, quickly he gets upset. Alpat Santoshi, with a little bit he is appeased. He is described like that. But he is extremely beneficent. Whoever goes to him, even the demons and the asuras go to him and ask for help, he generously gives them help. And the other gods get upset. Why is he helping the asuras? He should not be helping them. And he gives them whatever boons they ask. And afterwards the asuras create mayhem in the universe with the boon that they have got. And so Shiva says, what can I do? He asked, I gave. He is so compassionate. And then Vishnu has to come in and find a skillful trick around the boon to intervene and defeat the asura. And of course these are very profound ideas. They are presented in a almost childish form to children, but there are profound ideas that by intensity of effort, and an asura really does a lot of intense tapas, he can attain to whatever he wishes, but in the very act of attaining to whatever extraordinary power, by the means he has used, which is his own personal ego, and limiting the use of that extraordinary power to his ego, there is a flaw. And that flaw, being in the domain of the divided consciousness and the multiplicity, in the dualities, that flaw can be exploited. So we have, of course, the famous story where Hiranyakashipu goes and asks for a boon. And he says, make me immortal. And of course, he is told, you cannot do that because you're in the domain of dualities. But you can ask for any condition. So he says, all right, I cannot die during day, I cannot die during night, I cannot die inside my house, I cannot die outside my house, I cannot be killed by poison, I cannot be killed by a man, I cannot be killed by a woman, I cannot be killed by human beings or by animals. And he tries to cover every possible legal device. And then, of course, having done that, he can go around generally making everybody miserable, taking over the gods and their positions, and they're all relatively weak, lesser gods. His son, though, is a devotee of Vishnu. Vishnu is immanent. And so he keeps saying God is everywhere. And his father tries to get him free from this crazy idea. Eventually he says, I've had enough of you, now I'm going to get rid of you. And every attempt to get rid of him is prevented by Vishnu's grace. Eventually, this father gets very upset and says, where is your Vishnu? Let me fight him. Where is he? Is he here? And he says, the son says, Vishnu is everywhere. Is he in this pillar? And he gives a kick to the pillar, challenging Vishnu to emerge and fight him. Because he knows nothing can kill him. Interestingly, at that point, out of the pillar, Vishnu emerges. Except he's taken a form which is half human, half animal, genderless, and the whole event takes place just as the sun sets. It is about to set. So he takes Hiranyakashipu, grabs him. Now, technically, it's not a man, it's not an animal, it's not a woman, it's not a male. He cannot be killed by weapons, he cannot be killed by poisons, not day, not night, not inside house, nor outside. So he carries this titan on the sill of the door, neither inside nor outside. Waits for the point where the sun is just about to set, neither day nor night, and then tears apart from the stomach and kills him. Now, if you think about the whole story here, you can set up any condition, any device, any formulation. In any formulation, there is a limit in the very nature of formulation, giving form. And so the divine can enter being Anantaguna, infinite quality. He can find that quality which fits in, bypasses these limits, and like a even more skillful lawyer, finds the loophole, himself manifests to take on the form relevant to that loophole out of anything, because he is infinite quality. Out of the pillar, his body can emerge and take form, take on any form, and complete what has to be done. So there are many such very interesting stories, and they all suggest not only omnipresence, not only omnipotence, not only omniscience, but the ability to manifest infinitely any quality as necessary for that situation. So what Sri Aurobindo is writing here is, in the Indian conception, in the Indian religious thought, the personal God is not limited by his qualities. He is Anantaguna, capable of infinite qualities, and beyond them, and Lord of them. So he is beyond the qualities, Lord of the qualities, and capable of infinitely expressing infinite qualities, and to use them as he will. And he manifests himself in various names and forms of his infinite Godhead. So being like master of all the qualities, any form, any name, he can project himself as necessary in that moment, to satisfy the desire and need of the individual soul according to its own nature and personality. So if it is to help somebody, it will be to satisfy that. Or the need, in this case Hiranyakashipu needed to be defeated, needed to be liberated from his perverse shell where he had got stuck, and so on. This ability to respond to each nature and personality differently means that although we may give the same form, let's say Shiva, with each devotee he engages differently, puts forward a different aspect, a different power, a different mood. And so we may find that in different moods he behaves so differently that we need to give him a different name. Or in those different moods, he is so different that even the form appears to be different. And so in the stories, there are so many stories of each of these deities taking on specialized forms, under special conditions. When, for example, the same Shiva has to play the role of dissolution of the universe, as one who destroys and dissolves the universe in order that there can be a regeneration and a new form emerging. He becomes the Lord of the rhythms, Nata Raja. Raja being Lord, Nata is the rhythms, and he dances the universe into manifestation. And those are represented, you will see the form where it's so typical, where he's dancing and his hair is played out and the fire is forming a circle around the borders of the cosmos, and he raises his hand both in blessing, giving succor, and one of his feet is raised. If I remember right, the left foot is raised, and the right foot is pressing down the little demon, the individual ego, as they will say normally. And this poi is also, not only is it a pose of dance, but there are further deeper symbols. The left and the right representing the two balancing qualities of cold and heat, which in the human system is the Ida and Pingala inside the subtle body. And the lifting of the left leg is the withdrawal from manifestation of the cool aspect. The right leg pressing down is the intensification of the heating aspect. And so all of these little details in the symbol have very deep meaning, but nevertheless he's so different in this mode that is often seen to be unbearable because of what he is radiating. So it was said, again one of the stories, that once he was asked by a devotee to reveal this aspect of him, the destroyer aspect, the Lord of Rhythms, creator equally aspect. And he says, well, it is too intense for you, you have to prepare yourself. And there's a condition, I can only dance if I have a musician who's capable of keeping up with me. And so he says, there is only one person now on earth who can do that, and that is Ravana. He is an asura, demon king. But he is not only a devotee of Shiva, but also a great tapasvi. He has developed great spiritual power, and he is a master musician. He can only keep up with these rhythms. And so there's a whole scene described of how Ravana plays the music, and there's this revelation that takes place. So all of these little stories are told to children. And subtly, subconsciously, they form this image of the relationship with the divine and the nature of the divine and the different roles that the divine plays. That's why right at the beginning, Sri Aurobindo uses this very interesting phrase. The distinction between personal and impersonal is substantially the same as the Indian distinction, but the associations of the English words carry within them a certain limitation which is foreign to Indian thought. Because right from the beginning, you are brought up to think of the divine as always capable of pouring out from him anything as necessary. And yet there can be initial front of a certain personality. And yet that personality is not binding. From that personality he can take on any or many forms depending on the need at that moment. In fact, eventually there is this thing which happens, that this aspect works to serve that aspect. So Vishnu and Shiva have a very interesting relationship. When Shiva grants boons to the asuras freely, Vishnu has to go and help humanity and solve the problem. And when Vishnu takes birth upon earth to manifest as the avatar, Shiva himself puts out an emanation to serve Vishnu. So always there is this idea that each is helping the other. And in a sense they are complementary. In the more rationalized thought of the modern mind, this is given this triple form where Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the sustainer, Shiva is the destroyer. But that's a more rationalized expression. The truth of it is all three are within each other. Shiva himself, in destroying, is rhythming out the new movement. And that's why Sri Aurobindo describes him as the Lord of Transformation. Nataraja is the Lord of Transformation because he, in the rhythming out, he breaks the old rhythms and forms the new rhythms and transforms your whole being. Your whole being is nothing but a bundle of rhythms. Past rhythms are what form your current patterns. The future is new rhythms, and it is this process which is transforming it. And even Vishnu, in the very act of apparently preserving, is ensuring that things break down eventually and something new has to emerge, and so on. One can see each within the other, and the three are always as if specialized aspects of one single movement of the divine. And yet, the name tells you something. Shiva, the pure, bare, austere, sacred, does not manifest as an avatar. He puts out emanations, but does not himself descend in human form. His place is on the peaks of the snowy mountain, at the height, where all the different facets of reality unite on the point, tending to the absolute, bare, free of form, in a state of purity. Vishnu, on the other hand, is resting in this massive ocean of consciousness. And he is immanent everywhere. And so on. So these give you a sense of the distinctions between them. Sri Aurobindo describes in his commentary on the Veda these three different poises of the one divine consciousness. It would have been good to read, if you can bring Secret of the Veda. If you can bring that. It'll be worth reading when he describes these three. We have read it before, I think, but still in this context. At the same time, he has mentioned other deities, the special conceptions of Shiva or Vishnu or Brahma, or the divine mother of all, Durga or Kali. And here we have already a difference. God in feminine form, which is something not comfortable in recent European thought, particularly with Christianity, where the whole thing was given a strong masculine flavor. And so many today yearn for the feminine divine, and we find in the new age a lot of emphasis being given to the divine feminine, sometimes to the detriment of the divine masculine, but still. The idea that the divine can be mother, and divine mother of all, is deeply appealing to the human psyche, because we tend in the human relationships with father and mother to have very different aspects of our personality resonating with each of these. Thank you. And something of that we tend to project in our relationship with the divine. At least in the later formulations of the Christian concept of God, we have this masculine character very strong. And in the Indian conceptions, you will find a division between followers of the masculine forms of Shiva, Vishnu, or other deities, and the feminine forms. And so every now and then there is an attempt to as if synthesize, to bring these together. In the Indian tradition, there is the story, I don't remember exactly how it forms, but there is a situation where all three, Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, have to act in order for something to be achieved. And so they put forward a united emanation. And this becomes Dattatreya. All three together, and he has three heads, and in the form of a young child. I don't remember the story, but you can see how wherever there is a particular need to remind ourselves or to call upon the united triple action, it takes a certain form which we find helpful. And so you'll find in the Christian traditions, when they describe the angels or draw them, they have often a very feminine appearance, or they are genderless but feminine in appearance and in behavior. And so they become as if the link from God, or they become powers of God through which we link to God. They bring messages or take messages and so on. Something similar we find in that aspect of the Divine Mother. Not only she is mother, but she also pours herself as power of God and becomes the mediatrix between His will presiding over, or His creative power above, and the power that touches us now as we are and molds and shapes us in life. And so we naturally give ourselves to our mother and let her hug, embrace us with love. Let her soothe our pain. We naturally tend to father for strength, for support. Of course, they can switch roles, but these are the natural alignments which tend to take place. And so these things we tend to give in form, we look in aspect to the divine in these roles. So there are those who worship the Divine Mother, who will tell you this is the only way, this is the fastest way, because she takes you to Him. But there is not a hard distinction made, at least in Indian thought. There are just distinctions more in lineages and in traditions. And then forms, again Durga or Kali, representing specialized facets or qualities in their action. He mentions here, in the Christian tradition, the God of Calvin is fierce and inexorable. And this resonated with a certain need at a particular time during the reformations of the church in the then current historical context. An attempt to recreate our relationship with the divine in reaction to something which had gotten badly distorted. And there was also at the same time the breaking away from the religion by a more rationalized which became atheistic in the process. And so all of these things were taking place at the same time. And Calvin's God is a God who is immanent in His influence, in His omnipotence. His power is everywhere. To the tiniest detail, nothing can happen without His will. But then pushing it to the logical extreme, if nothing can happen without His will, then it is His will which makes everything happen, and so you have no free will. You have no choice. And even if you ask Him, plead with Him, it's His choice finally which overrides. And so the God becomes suddenly this fierce, inexorable, you cannot appeal to. And what He decides is imprinted. It is He who decides whether you will wake up and call upon Him or not, if you will remember Him or not. And if He decides you will not, well, He has condemned you, effectively, because you don't really have a choice. Your choice is nothing but a pretense of the surface appearance of His will. And so suddenly the God becomes this terrifying and very fierce personality. Obviously at some point there has to be a corrective, and so you have the sweet and loving God of Saint Francis, who's always responding to every call, who's always forgiving, who's always being kind, who always puts up front the expression of love, and so on. And the similar pattern he shows in the Indian tradition. Vishnu is always gracious. Kali is terrible, though always loving and beneficent. Even when she slays, she saves by her destruction and has pity for those that she slays. And this reminds us, somewhere inside us, that these are all aspects, attitudes we have to have in life. Sometimes we have to do something which may be violent or harmful to another. As for example, when you have to kill certain insects, because otherwise they would destroy something else which is more precious. And you don't do it by hating them. You do it the way Kali does. She has compassion even for those she destroys. When she is destroying the Asuras, she destroys them in order to liberate them. And the stories go very deep. Again, there are layers and layers in these stories. So I mentioned earlier Hiranyakashipu. He, as the story goes, was one of two guards of Vishnu. And once when Vishnu was resting, and a great rishi went to meet him, they stopped him saying, well, our Lord is resting. So he got upset and cursed them. And said, how dare you stop me? Well, you have to go on earth and spend your life in human form in order to learn and grow and develop a little bit, to evolve, So poor guards, it's not their fault. So Vishnu, with great compassion, gives them a choice. All right, since you've been cursed, I cannot prevent it. It comes from a great power. But I give you a choice. Again, entering the dualities, there's always the skill of the lawyer. You can choose to have a normal human evolution, very comfortable and happy and joyous, but through a long process of growth. Or you oppose me, and then I have to come and destroy you, and then you'll be freed and you'll be back as my guards. And so they say, we don't want to be away from you for so long, so we choose to oppose you. Now, again, there are deep layers, and somewhere inside your mind, inside your psyche, you are shaped by the story. You are taught that there's no such thing as something fundamentally evil. And in fact, even the path that the Asura takes is a quicker path to getting free. By opposing the divine, you're compelling the divine to manifest and release you from this perverted or distorted form. It's not the normal evolutionary path though. And yet you play a role, you're fulfilling a divine will in the process, and so on. So a lot of things happen as a young child. These stories mold you deeply, and you begin to see the whole world differently. In fact, in the story itself, we are taught that these Asuric beings inside are praying to be liberated soon. And so they go with greater force to oppose the divine. And think about it. It changes how you see the so-called appearance of evil. Something in what happens in evil speeds up evolution by provoking, by compelling certain changes. So, I was digressing, but the idea that you can kill even with compassion becomes then your reference point in your life when you have to do things which are not always pleasant but which are necessary. So he's given these series of images, and he says obviously these are very partial and relative. They can only be relative sense of the infinite and omnipresent creator and ruler of the universe. Consider what would the infinite and omnipresent creator and ruler be like. He has used 4 words. He is infinite. He has to be without limits. Infinite in every way, in knowledge, in power, in consciousness, in delight, in space, and in time. So immediately you have the sense of omnipresence also, and an omniscience also, an omnipotence also. And then he's infinite and omnipresent, so he's everywhere, creator, capital C, and ruler, capital R, of the universe. So being everywhere he can create, and everywhere he rules. And you can see the similarity with the Calvinian idea that the divine will is really sustaining everything. But it does not take it to its narrow logical conclusion. Therefore, there is no true free will. Rather, it says he is concealed and from behind supports, nudges, pushes, and plays through all these forms. We ourselves are nudged and supported by his presence within us. But at any point, in anything, he can create and push forward his will to change circumstances. And therefore, when the devotee calls out for help, he is there in the pillar. He is there in the fire, into whom Hiranyakashipu threw his child. He is there in the wind when Hiranyakashipu threw his child across the edge of the mountain. He is everywhere. So there is a sense of an intimacy, of closeness. But he is infinite quality in each of these, and therefore can emerge out of any of these forms and aspects to reveal the fullness of his infinity at any moment. So that is the sense of the true creator. If you had to give it a form, what would you do? It's a bit difficult, because the moment you give a form, you tend to reduce, you tend to narrow, unless you make the form itself plastic enough. So in practice, you will find always the plasticity of the forms. In the Vedic conception, there has not been this narrow reduction. And so you will find there a very interesting description, and we will read from that now. This is on Sri Aurobindo's commentary on Vishnu, the all-pervading Godhead. So he first of all questions and contradicts, he contradicts the current European concept that these are new deities invented and all that. And he says you cannot measure the importance of a deity just by how many verses are dedicated to them in the Veda. And then he says, Vishnu, Rudra, Brahmanaspati, the Vedic originals of the later Puranic triad Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, provide the conditions of the Vedic work and assist it from behind the more present and active gods. So these three are as if behind. In front are the more active, more specific, narrow deities. But these three are less close to it and in appearance less continually concerned in their daily movements. So in the Puranic conception, you will see this represented by the Trinity. They watch the human affairs as if from a great height, from a great distance. Only when things become really difficult and somebody from creation reaches out to them calling, or the gods come to them for help, then they intervene. So you can see their station as if supporting from behind, and there are the more active gods who are doing the more day-to-day maintenance tasks. And then he describes what they are. Brahmanaspati is the creator by the word. He calls light and visible cosmos out of the darkness of the inconscient ocean and speeds the formations of conscious being upward to their supreme goal. So this is the creative power which puts through vibration, creates the forms and draws them out from the darkness and pushes forward the evolution and the formations of conscious being. It is from this creative aspect of Brahmanaspati that the later conception of Brahma, the creator, arose. For the upward movement of Brahmanaspati's formations, Rudra, that is Shiva, supplies the force. Now here's a creative movement, the formations come into being and move forward in the evolution, the thing which gives them force. inside. Now you see, you will find all three are within each other. There's no spatial separation. They have just distinctions in role. Rudra supplies the force. He is named in the Veda the mighty one in heaven, but he begins his work upon the earth and gives effect to the sacrifice on the 5 planes of our ascent. He is the violent one who leads the upward evolution of the conscious being. His force battles against all evil, smites the sinner and the enemy. Intolerant of defect and stumbling, he is the most terrible of the gods, the one of whom alone the Vedic rishis have any real fear. And remember, Shiva has 2 children, Skanda, Kartikeya, and Ganesha. So, Agni, the Kumara, prototype of the Puranic Skanda, is on earth the child of this force of Rudra. So, Skanda, or the Skanda represents here that aspect of the willpower, Ganesha representing the aspect of the knowledge, and the two together, knowledge and will, being as if children of Shiva and the Divine Mother. The Maruts, vital powers which make light for themselves by violence, are Rudra's children. So he has a whole host of children separate from these two. Agni and the Maruts are the leaders of the fierce struggle upwards from Rudra's first earthly, obscure creation to the heavens of thought, the luminous worlds. So in the Puranic conception, Skanda, Kartikeya, is the head of the army of all these others who are the Maruts. So when they go to battle against the demons, he leads the way. You can see how these are very symbolic representations of something which is otherwise a cosmic movement. But this violent and mighty Rudra, who breaks down all defective formations, groupings of outward and inward life, has also a benigner aspect. He is the supreme healer. Opposed, he destroys. Called on for aid and propitiated, he heals all wounds and all evil and all sufferings. The force that battles is his gift, but also the final peace and joy. In these aspects of the Vedic God are the primitive material necessary for the evolution of the Puranic Shiva Rudra, the destroyer and healer, the auspicious and the terrible, the master of the force that acts in the worlds, and the yogin who enjoys the supreme liberty and peace. So you have these double poises. And then the third, Vishnu. For the formations of Brahmanaspati's word, for the actions of Rudra's force, Vishnu supplies the necessary static elements, space, the ordered movement of the worlds, the ascending levels, the highest goal. He has taken 3 strides, and in the space created by the 3 strides, he has established all the worlds. In these worlds, he, the all-pervading, dwells and gives less or greater room for the action and movement of the gods, and so on. So we don't need to go further. Now you can see here these 3 things. The word creating with vibration, giving form and taking forward evolution. The force that is inside the form, and the force that battles that which opposes the form and the evolution, which gives also at the same time the peace. And separately, the framework, the static framework, the layers, the levels, the space in which all this manifests. Now when you think about it, all these are nearly 3 aspects of the one divine as he moves to manifest himself. One divine taking a triple status: creative, sustaining, immanent, and pushing forward, compelling change in the transformative evolutionary force. And they're all there. And they're deeply interwoven one into the other. None can function without the other two. And yet, depending on a situation, one is more important, the other may be less in that situation at that moment. So in the Veda, because they hold always this totality in the vision, you will find repeatedly one or more of these aspects is brought forward, appreciated, praised, invoking and evoking all those powers in praising them, affirming and fixing them in us. And then the Rishi moves to a different aspect, and now praising that, invoking, evoking, affirming, fixing us, and moving to the next. And with each of these, the Rishi says, you contain all the others. It moves to the next and says, you contain all the others, and so on. When you think of it this way, you're reminded again and again, although you're calling on an aspect, in that is the infinite qualities, infinite potential, the one divine, using this as a mask and appearance. When first the European scholars 200 years ago took up these verses, coming with that more divisive, rationalized thought, they said this doesn't make sense. So either the rishis were just trying to please each of these deities and extol them just to get benefits. It's not monotheistic. It's neither pagan form where all these different gods were quarreling among each other. They're all in each other somehow. So they gave it a special name, henotheism. But it's not that either. In fact, it's monotheism, but it's not a flat monotone of the monotheism. There is only one divine, but there's an infinity of aspects and powers and potentials which are always playing out. And comes this powerful idea, according to the need, according to the desire of the individual soul, according to its nature and personality, the divine puts forward that which is most necessary. And so here comes the most important thing for us in our practice. Set aside the distinctions of names, of forms, genders of the deities. There's only one divine. You call upon him, her, whatever term you use, any name you give to him. Let's say you are a devotee of Vishnu, or a devotee of Shiva, or Kali, or Durga, or any other deity by any name. Now, when you call the divine, how does he respond? He responds in the manner most helpful to you at that moment, according to the desire with which you're calling, the need of your soul in the current evolutionary status, according to your nature and your personality. And all four things are being taken into account. There's a specific thing which comes with desire. So, we read the line, he says, he is Ananta Guna, capable of infinite qualities and beyond them and lord of them, and to use them as he will. And he manifests himself in various names and forms of his infinite Godhead to satisfy the desire and need of the individual soul according to its own nature and personality. And so at that moment, what is it you most need? That's what comes forward. If your personality is gentle, then it comes forward with a gentle form. If your personality is strong and fierce, and you will not respect a gentle form, then it comes forward with an equally matching or even greater fierceness and strength, that you say, here is someone I can respect. You see how it works with the human nature. Gentle people respect gentleness. Fierce people respect fierce types. So it comes as necessary to set the relationship that is most helpful to you. And if the relationship most helpful to you at that point is such that if he were to come and tell you what to do, and you would oppose because your ego is still very strong, then he does not come in that form, he comes in a different form, suggesting from behind, nudging you in a direction that your ego is not disturbed. And you have still the illusion that I thought of this wonderful idea and I did it and I made the breakthrough. So you have this, so many stories where the divine comes in some ordinary seeming form. Or if your ego needs to be broken, then he will come in an ordinary form and challenge and defeat you. Great, but now here is an ordinary fallen person who is able to defeat me. How is that possible? So there is the story, I think it is Narad, who has got, in the Puranas, he has got a bit of an ego now, he thinks he's so wonderful. And so he is given a task, and he has, I think it is, I don't remember now, he has to cross, go somewhere and do some work, and on the way, Hanuman, a monkey is sitting there with his tail, and a person, let's say, I don't remember the name, the person says, "Oh, monkey, get out of my way." And the monkey says, "I'm sorry, I'm very aged, I'm sick, you can let me," and move it aside. So this fellow dismissively kicks the tail and ends up stubbing his toe. "Oh, your tail is so heavy," he tries to lift and he cannot, and so on. Eventually the monkey reveals himself to be Hanuman. But the idea being, the moment you have a flaw, the divine response to you is to help you in your evolution to get free of your flaw. Depending on your nature, you may find it helpful for someone to show you a greater way, or for someone to challenge you and compel you to accept your insufficiency and thereby break your ego, or to work from within your limitation and prepare you for the larger breakthrough. So very often, before you can have the full revelation of the Lord, He comes in various human forms to make you look more deeply. And this is so common in stories, even close to modern times. I have a beautiful book which I came across recently of a saint who would go into deep meditations, and on a whim he would go for long pilgrimages, renunciate, and because of certain practices, techniques that he knew to extend his life, he was able to live to 185 years and died only in 1951 or 52, some decent time. He narrated many of his stories of how he had so many times darshan of the Lord. And often it would be like this, that he is in a state of great intense tapas, sometimes hurting the body, and a child would come and offer him food when the body didn't have proper food, and he would take the food, look up, and the child is gone. Where did the child go? He looks all around, nowhere to be found. And then, of course, it is shown to him in a vision that it was the Lord Himself who came to give him food. You wonder, why didn't the Lord appear straight away? Why does He appear in such forms? Or sometimes as an old man or an old woman, gives him some help, gives him some advice, and he starts thinking about it and he realizes, oh, this cannot come from an ordinary person. He turns to look and the person is gone. There's many such stories in the Puranic tradition, of course. Why didn't the Lord Himself appear and say, "Here I am, do this"? Precisely because it would be most helpful for you to start looking for the Lord in people, in forms, in the world, and not merely in some abstraction of a subtle form of our world. And when the Lord appears in these ways, you start wondering, is He there in the next person and the next person? And especially in those forms which you would most neglect and most ignore. When you realize He could be hidden in those, then you start valuing each of those forms, the ones you would have dismissed most easily. And so in this way, there's a whole deep psychology. What would be the form most helpful for your evolution? There was a movie maybe now 20 years ago, where they had somebody challenging God, and then God appears to him and says, okay, you do my work and let's see how you manage. And this is an American movie out of Hollywood, so they had a black man as God, of course dressed all in white. But this character, who is a white American, says you can't be God. And so he has to show him. And of course he says that I could have taken any form. But at that time, in that context, in the American collective consciousness, this was a necessary form to break certain rigid racial stereotypes and divisions which had been on for such a long time. And it surely helped greatly. Or there was another movie, I do not remember now the details, where God appears in female form, or the devil appears in female form, and so on. Again, the person is made to question his conception of God or devil, and thus expand himself one more step and one more step. And so the idea being that the divine can put forward any form, any quality, any aspect, what would be most helpful. Now you could say, all right, since you're there to help, well, make a great leap. But if he comes with a great leap, then you cannot recognize him. If the divine comes forward and says, here I am in my transcendent and formless aspect, too much. I need to relate. So, matching at each moment what you need. In the human nature, there are so many facets. According to our evolutionary path, our nature and our personality also has facets. Our soul across lives has developed certain facets of its soul personality, which then reflect into the surface inherited and developed character and interests. And so the more evolved the soul, often the more complex its development, and so the more complex its expression in personality. And then what happens? The divine resonates to us on many phases, many fronts. It's a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo, where somebody asks him this question: is it okay for me to feel affinity with such and such, and 2 or 3 names of deities? Even though he is following the integral yoga and he is now a disciple of Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo makes a comment, something to the effect that a soul which has developed many facets will necessarily find affinity with many facets of the divine, and it's fine to feel that. Only you must know that they are all aspects of the one divine, to make effort to see through each the same one. And so that's you can see the value of more composite forms of the divine, as I mentioned earlier, the Tattariya, and there are others also similarly, where different aspects of the divine merged to join to put forward a certain power. I believe in the formation of Durga also, all the gods came together and poured their energies to give her the form that she would be able to destroy the Mahishasura, buffalo asura, literally, who was terrorizing the universe. Buffalo suggesting something of the subconscious and inconscient. And so something which is rich and complex in its opposition to evolution needs equally a rich and complex response in the divine intervention to match it in all of its facets. And so Durga is given all of these powers joining, merging to create this form. So I think this is enough of dwelling on this idea. We can see how different names and different forms of His infinite Godhead come forward to satisfy and the desire and need of the individual soul according to its own nature and personality. It is for this reason that the normal European mind finds it so difficult to understand Indian religion as distinct from Vedantic or Sankhya philosophy. These are, of course, much more simply defined. So, because it cannot easily conceive of a personal God with infinite qualities, a personal God who is not a person, but the sole real person and the source of all personality. And so this is what we are brought to and reminded of again and again. Through whatever deity, it is always the one personality, the source of all personality that we have to relate to. Yet, that is the only valid and complete truth of the divine personality. So, having discussed the truth of personality, we have now to look at what is the truth of impersonality. And immediately, based on what we have already seen, the personality is not bound by personality. He is free of his own personality and personalities. And therefore, his status of freedom, when it is highlighted, appears to us as impersonal. But his true station includes both the impersonal and the personal and the infinity of the personalities. So that's how we would immediately see the whole thought process. Sri Aurobindo, of course, takes this up and then discusses three levels through which we can approach this aspect both of personality and impersonality. I have had occasionally people that I have met who have said something like this: I don't like this idea of personality of God. The idea of impersonal, qualityless God is so easy. Why do you want to reduce to personality? And equally, there are other extremes who say, what is this abstract impersonality, qualityless God? Look at this particular, whatever it is, their favorite form of deity, so full of love and compassion, so easy to relate to. And when you think about it, which you find easiest to relate to is only in response to what is your current need and your current development. And eventually, all these have to merge, and we have an experience of something which is all of these and yet transcends all of these. And such would be our approach in the integral yoga. Using them all as necessary, all those aspects or forms, to the extent and in the manner that they are helpful. So we can pause here for today. On a more personal note, to our own relationship with the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, there are so many interesting insights and experiences that we can gain in this light. There's a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo. Somebody writes to him about seeing in dream the Mother, but in a form which was slightly different. Or maybe it was in relation to seeing Sri Aurobindo in a form slightly different. And he says that is perhaps one of my aspects. And then he comments, the Mother has many more aspects than I. It's interesting because she is the power that manifests and so much more richly spreading out to capture all the facets as necessary for humanity. And we have so many personal experiences people have narrated. Very often, when they have had unusual interventions, especially interventions where there was danger and they needed protection, they have seen the Mother dressed in the clothing that she used when she went to the playground, wearing the kitty cap and the long sleeves, and sometimes with the wristbands. because that was the poise she took when in action, especially in physical action. And we have had cases of people who have met her in that form long before they had seen her photographs or met her physically. In Sri Aurobindo's own case also, there are certain aspects which were seen by people as necessary according to their readiness or the particular quality of power that was given for their help or their past relationship of sadhana in relation to the divine. There was one case where documented in a book called The Lost Footsteps by Silviu Crasionas. I think he's a Romanian general during the Second World War who was captured by the Nazi forces, and he was tortured. He had all the secrets he would have revealed, and so he made great effort not to break. They put him through the most grueling torture, but he says at some point when he felt he was going to break, he found himself pulled out of the body and in the presence of a great sage. He describes the scene as a Kali temple, and this sage seated cross-legged, dark-skinned, with a beard and perhaps long hair, I don't know. This is of course very generic as a description also. He hears somebody screaming in the background. Of course that's his body screaming, but torture, but he's in great peace. And for 15 days he survives this. At the end of which the sage tells him now, during which time he is taught many things, including his purpose of life. And then the sage says, now you'll soon be freed and I won't come. So as a last step, he asked the sage for his name. And the man writes the name in the book, Orobin Dogos, Aurobindo Ghosh. That's how he heard it, Aurobindo Ghosh, you see. But it was very clearly Sri Aurobindo who had been helping him, but the form in which he describes is not the image that you see in the later years, but it's much closer to the image that you see in the earlier years when he was in the freedom struggle and had just come to Pondicherry. So, but still, if you see the way the image is described, it also, because of the Kali temple, it aligns with a particular line of his own personal development. And so that's the form in which he was seeing him. An aspect, one of the aspects of Sri Aurobindo's in action. There are many such interesting stories which pop up once in a while. In her own manifestation in life, in dealing with people, we saw the mother's entire personality shifting from person to person. With a particular sadhak in the ashram, she may put forward this intense, fierce concentration, purifying, pushing him in his inner sadhana, extremely serious and concentrated. The next one to come, she would smile and joke and make herself accessible. A child comes, she would become like a child with him. But in each of these personalities, it was still an aspect of the divine that one could see and feel. It was still the Divine Mother. She was always Mother. But as Mother, she could take on so many poises according to the necessity. In one incident where somebody who was then, I think, a teacher already in the school, she had grown up here as a child and then she was a teacher. She said to the mother, "Mother, everybody says you're the divine. Is it true?" And so mother looked at her for a long time, seriously, and kept quiet. And next day when she came, she describes how she went before the mother, and before she could do anything, the mother stood up with her arm pointing straight up, and she saw this huge column of light. And you wonder why next day? Why not at that very moment when she asked the question? Obviously, there was a necessity for a preparation, not from her side, but from the woman's side. And the preparation was made probably during the night or by the force which she put initially, preparing her to be able to see and experience that. And it was this infinite column of light, white light, which we have also heard from Kapali Shastriyar. But he would see that from the terrace. He would watch the mother as she was walking on the terrace of the ashram building. On Sundays she would wash her hair, and she would walk in the sun to dry the hair, and he would stand there. Many of the old sadhaks would stand, and once Panditji went with him, and Shastriyar said, "I see her as a column of white light." And Panditji didn't see. So he leaned and touched his forehead, and that immediately opened the sight, and he saw what Shastriyar was seeing. So what is her true form? Not just this body, that is the infinite column of light. And there's a whole Puranic background to the story. When Vishnu and Brahma are quarreling about who is greater. Now think about this. Of course, in the Purana, one has to give them a more human form. So, the quarreling about who is greater. Because without me, the universe wouldn't be created. Without me, it wouldn't be sustained, etc. Okay, so now comes the challenge given to them. They are shown this pillar of white light, and they are asked to find its beginning or its end, and each goes in a different direction. Again, very symbolic, which direction one goes up, the other goes down. Eventually not, and they come back, and then it is shown that this is the absolute, and the poise of Shiva in the absolute. And so, but the idea being that there is this perception of the divine as this infinite column of pure white light, and that is what they saw in the mother. In her physical form itself, in the physical body, her body was so plastic it could change shape. And Panditji narrates how they would see because he met the mother many times, sometimes during the day. Every time they went to see her, the physical appearance of her form looked different. And there is a letter of Sri Aurobindo where somebody asks about this, and he says, yes, it is true. The mother's body is plastic enough that the physical shape can change to reflect the change in her consciousness. So as she is modulating what she puts forward of her consciousness, of the infinite quality, Ananta Guna, what she modulates with each person and according to the interaction necessary, the physical form being plastic enough, of course, has to change. To the extent that it is plastic, it will change. Even our form changes. When we are angry or when we are happy, it changes form. But in the parts which are most plastic, right? If in her case the full body had been made so much more plastic, of course that form also changes. And the most dramatic of these is the narration that we heard from Tanmaya, a French disciple. He was a close friend of Pavitrada, also a French disciple, who had passed away. And you will recall Mother narrating how as he left his body, part by part he transferred himself into her and fused himself into her consciousness. And she said, very few people have that knowledge. Obviously it's a thing he had developed in a previous lifetime, where he was a Buddhist and things like that. So Pavitrada was very unhappy, he was sad, and Mother kept telling him, why do you cry? Why do you cry? He is here within me. He is here within me. But he was inconsolable. Finally, Mother said, Don't cry, He's within me. Do you want to see Him? Do you want to see Him? And then she smiled. And as she smiled, he told us this, and he had tears in his eyes as he spoke. He said, Mother's face changed completely. It took on physically. It was plastic. Physically, it took on the form of Pavitrada's face, smiling at him. And he was stunned. And then after a while, when he was pacified, her form shifted back to what it was, physically. And she smiled. After that he said he was never unhappy about it. So what is the real form? When you think about it, while we still enjoy all the facets of the forms, we always know that behind this is this infinite personality and infinite form, infinite potential. So he is not a person, but the sole real person, capital P, and the source of all personality. Yet, that is the only valid and complete truth of the Divine Personality. And then he describes 3 grades by which we relate to this conception of the Divine Personality. First, there is this aspect which is our favorite person, the Ishta Devata. And then there is behind that, the infinite potential, the Ananta Guna, the all personality, the real person. And behind that still a third, which is the ultimate source of all these. And that's what we have to relate to eventually, but through these and accepting all these. And that is the theme of the next paragraph, which we will take up next Friday. Oh.